Hey y'all, so for my Unit 5 interactive assessment, I am really going to be focusing on Chapter 12 just because I find it more in my everyday life rather than 13 and 14 being psychological disorders and therapies and all that stuff. So I don't really deal with much of that, but I know that a lot of people do. I just found Chapter 12 more in my everyday life, and I thought that it was super cool and super interesting. So I wanted to start off with a quote because I really like this quote, and our book tends to be very funny at times. It says, "If you're like most people, then like most people, you don't know you're like most people." Science has given us a lot of facts about the average person, and one of the most reliable of these facts is that the average person doesn't see themselves as average. And I thought that was funny. It was cute. And then this has a lot to do with the self-serving bias that talks about, under the personality and observing ourselves. And the self-serving bias is basically just a readiness to perceive ourselves favorably. So when reading along, I was like, oh, this isn't me. When I read the title, I was like, oh, it doesn't relate to me at all. But it does. It actually has a lot to do with me, and I don't even realize it. So it's basically people accept more responsibility for good deeds than for bad, and for successes rather than failures, is what the book said. And thinking about that's so true. It sounds like a bunch of words, but it really is. This is apparent in all different things. In athletes, students, and even something like a car accident it mentioned. And this was so true. I had an experience. The very first year I got my driver's license, probably about 3 months in, I was in a wreck with my best friend. My best friend was in the car in front of me, and she slammed on her brakes in the pouring rain, and so I slid into her, and it was not my fault. I had told myself over and over, I told my parents, I told the doctors, I told everybody, I was like, it's not my fault, I didn't do it, because I was looking at myself more favorably, when really if it would have been, if I would have been in the car in front, I would have said the same thing, it's not my fault. And I totally get that, and that happens all around us all the time. And that was the first thing that clicked. I remember doing that. That was my very first instinct, was to blame or to not put it on me, because it wasn't my fault and it never will be. But this is also apparent in athletes, and I think that it's super, super interesting, because I mentioned this about a football game a couple of weeks ago, If athletes win, it's on them. If they lose, it's not on them. They blame it on things like the ref or the scorekeeper or their teammates or how they weren't working, the coaching, anything that they can think of to blame it on, they're going to blame it on. Rather, when they win, they're having a good day and they have skill and they have all of this and they can do that. It's all about that person and, what they're feeling. This happens with students. I am so guilty of this. If I don't do well on a test, I immediately, don't put it on me. I tend to blame it on the week, or that everyone is sick, or the teacher, we just weren't taught well that week for that test, or we weren't prepared well for that test. It was never, I didn't study enough, or I wasn't prepared. I blame it on other people. But if I do make 100 or make a great grade or an A or something, then I'm like, oh, I studied so hard, I owe myself this. And I thought that was kind of funny. I know that we all struggle with that and we all do that. Not necessarily blaming people, but we hold ourselves responsible for the good things, and others normally for the bad things. We don't hold ourselves responsible for the negative things as much. However, with the self-serving bias, we do tend to put ourselves down a lot. And I do this to myself. I don't know why. I didn't know why. And it says in the book we do it for 4 reasons, and they all make so much sense. I feel like we all tend to do this a lot. And they're all super common, and the first one is to protect us from repeating our same mistakes. So normally when we get mad at ourselves, we don't do it again, or we don't want to do it again. 2, prompt positive feedback. The closest I can think of is, oh, I feel so ugly today, and then everybody's like, oh, you're so pretty, something like that. I think that's super common, especially in females. They could help prepare us for a possible failure. So putting ourselves down, for something, we expect the worst. We prepare for the worst. And then number 4 is to put down our old selves. So we can put down ourselves and what we did and kind of, blame ourselves. And that's like putting down our old selves, putting that away. So even with a self-serving bias, we can still tend to feel inferior, and that isn't the worst thing in the world, but not necessarily thinking that you're the greatest in the world. It's instinct. It's kind of what we do. So I thought this was super interesting. I didn't even know that something like this existed, but reading this, I think I actually read through it another time before I got on my discussion, because I was just like, this is so interesting. We do this all the time, and I didn't even realize it. So I hope that y'all all can relate to that too, and yeah, this has been fun. So thank y'all. Have a good day.